A little homeless girl finds frozen tide. Up shepherd dog at a bus stop, what she does next shocks everyone's snow was. Falling in slow, heavy flakes blanketing the sidewalks of the quiet town in A. Thick frozen silence. It was the kind of winter night where even the street lamps seemed to flicker more dimly, and no one lingered outdoors unless they had to, but Emma was still out there just 10 years. Older shoes soaked through her fingers, stiff with cold and a threadbare coat, pulled tight around her thin frame. She walked with her head down a worn-out backpack on her shoulders and no destination in mind other than somewhere that did not feel like the wind was cutting through her bones. She passed stores, already dark houses closed tight behind holiday lights and locked doors, and finally turned onto a side street where an old glass and metal bus shelter stood. There was no bus at this hour, but at least the awning would block the snow. She stepped inside, shivering as she pressed her back against the plastic bench and pulled her knees to her chest. Her breath came out in white clouds then. She heard it, a sound low and almost lost. Beneath the rustle of wind, it was not a car, not a person. A soft whimper followed by the faintest scrape against the concrete. Emma turned her head toward the corner of the shelter and froze there, tied tightly to the metal pole behind. The bench was a large German shepherd. His fur was soaked, his body hunched low to the ground. His ribs were visible through his coat, which was matted with slush and grit, the leash wrapped around. The pole was frayed at the end like someone had torn it from a fence or post and left him here. He was shaking violently, not barking, not growling, just trembling with a quiet, hopeless sound in his throat. Emma stared for a long moment. Then she moved without thinking. She pulled off the small blanket from her pack, the only thing she had left from her mother, and crawled toward the dog. He did not resist. He did not lift his head. She knelt beside him, untied the leash from the pole, and gently wrapped a damp, worn blanket around his back. "You are freezing," she whispered as she pressed her side against his, trying to share what little body heat she had. The dog exhaled his breath, fogging the cold air, and let his head fall lightly against her shoulder. "I am cold too," she added, her voice trembling more from emotion than from cold, "but we will be warm together." She sat like that for a long time, her arms around him, rocking slightly. Then, after a pause, she whispered again, so soft it was almost lost in the snow, "I think they forgot. You too, but I will not." The dog blinked, eyes dull but no longer empty. She rested her cheek against his head. "I am going to call you Bear," she said with the faintest smile, "because you are big and strong, and I think you are just pretending not to care." And in that forgotten corner of a shining city, under the broken light of a silent shelter, a girl with nothing gave the only warmth she had to a dog with even less in the world, though it did not know it yet, had just changed for both of them. The days that followed blurred into a quiet rhythm of survival. Emma and Bear moved together like shadows, slipping through alleyways and back streets, always avoiding crowds, always watching the snow began to melt. But the cold lingered, and they found shelter where they could, under stairwells, behind dumpsters, beneath the rotting wooden awning of an abandoned market on the edge of town. That broken market became their home. It had once been a place full of life, with colorful awnings and shouting vendors, but now it was just concrete and broken glass. Still, it offered a roof, and to Emma that was enough. Every evening she would gather scraps from a bakery's trash bin, bruised apples no one wanted, and she always gave the biggest share. The bear, he would not eat unless she did, and even when his ribs showed through his fur, he stayed close by. Eyes on her. Bear's limb grew worse after a week. His back leg had a wound, possibly from where the leash had dug into the skin, or from something sharp on the streets. Emma tried her best. She rinsed the cut with cold rainwater, patted it dry with the cleanest corner of her old shirt, and whispered encouragements as he winced. She knew it was not enough, but it was all she had. One night, huddled beneath a thin plastic tarp they'd found in a trash pile, Emma rested her head against Bear's side. His breathing was steady as warmth, the only comfort she had. She whispered, my mom used to sing to me when I was scared after she got sick and didn't wake up. I thought I'd never feel safe again. Bear shifted his paw, twitching slightly in sleep. My dad drank a lot after that. He hit me once, then I ran. They sent me to a shelter, but it was full of shouting and broken things. I left. She paused, reaching up to stroke his ear gently. You're the only one who listens, she said softly. The only one who never tells me I'm too much or too small. Or in the way Bear let out a low sigh, his head rolling closer to her lap. We might not have a house, but I think we're still family. They stayed like that through the night. When Emma woke, the world was gray and damp and bitter, but Bear was still there, watching her, ready to follow wherever she led. Later that day, Bear pawed at a trash bin near the back of a diner. He was starving. She could tell his gait was slower and his eyes heavier. She whispered, no, Bear, wait. That one's dangerous. But he was already climbing up, nose pressed against the cold steel. The lid crashed, and she gasped, rushing forward. She grabbed him tightly, her arms thrown around his neck, pulling him back down. Please, she murmured, shaking. Don't do that. If something happens to you, I don't know what I'll do. Bear nuzzled her chest, letting out a low, apologetic whine. Emma held him tighter, burying her face into his fur. We don't need a feast. We just need each other. In that moment, beneath a gray sky and the scent of garbage and old grease, a little girl and her dog held each other like lifelines, because they were the night was colder than usual, the kind of biting cold that clung to Emma's bones. No matter how tightly she pulled her coat around herself, she had found a dry patch of sidewalk near the old post office, a forgotten corner of town where no one ever came at this hour. The buildings, faded bricks and boarded up windows cast long shadows, but at least the wind was blocked by the overhang. She sat down, with Bear curled beside her, his head on her lap, eyes half closed. With trembling fingers, Emma gathered a few scraps of paper, some bits of cardboard, and a broken lighter she had found near the train tracks earlier that week. She flicked it again and again, trying to get a small flame going. Her stomach ached from hunger, and her fingers had gone red and numb. But if she could just get a little warmth, maybe Bear could sleep easier. A spark caught a tiny flame, flared up. She leaned forward, shielding it with her hands, and came the voices, rough, slurred, too loud for quiet, of the street. She froze from the alley near the street lamp. 3 men stumbled into view. They were middle-aged, bundled in worn jackets, beer bottles swinging from their hands. Their laughter was sharp. Mean, look at that, one of them barked, pointing toward her. What the hell is this, a hobo picnic? Another one squinted. Some brat lighting fires now. Damn beggars are everywhere, Emma said. Nothing. She kept her eyes on the flame, trying to will it to stay alive. Bear sat up slowly beside her, ears alert, body tense. Hey, the tallest one called out, stepping closer. This is not your city. Girl, you do not belong here. We're not hurting anyone, Emma said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Please just let us be. But they did not listen. One of them kicked the small tin can that held her food. It clattered into the street, its contents spilling into the slush. Another reached down, grabbed her old lunchbox full of belongings, and slammed it to the ground, breaking it open. Clean up your trash, little rat, he spat. Emma reached for her bag, but before she could grab it, a hand shoved her backward. She fell hard onto the icy sidewalk, her elbow striking the concrete. Pain shot up her arm, and she gasped, curling around herself. That was when Bear moved. The moment Emma hit the ground, he was on his feet. The low, guttural growl that came from his chest was unlike anything she had heard from him before. His fur bristled. He stood between Emma and the men, his teeth bared, body rigid. One of the men laughed. Oh, look, the Luma thinks he's tough, he stepped forward, raising his arm as if to shoo. Bear away, Bear lunged, a man shouted in. Surprise, as Bear bit down hard on his forearm, the beer bottle fell, and shattered, the other man yelled, scrambling backward as Bear snarled, shaking his head once before letting go. The bitten man stumbled, swearing and clutching his bleeding arm. You crazy dog, he screamed. It's rabid. Let's go, one of them shouted. Screw this. The three turned and ran, disappearing into shadows, their curses echoing through the night. Emma sat frozen on the sidewalk, staring at Bear. His chest heaved a stance, still protective, but his eyes flicked toward her, softening. She pushed herself up slowly, pain radiating from her shoulder, and wrapped her arms around his neck. Bear, she whispered, her voice breaking, you protected me. Her sleeve was wet with blood. She was shaking, but Bear stayed, still pressing his body against hers like a wall, like a shield. They would have hurt me, she murmured, but you didn't let them. Above them, snow began to fall again, soft and silent. Emma clutched Bear tighter, burying her face into his fur. I will never let anyone take you away, she whispered, and Bear, silent and steady, stood watch, his breath forming clouds in the cold, his heart beating for the only person who had ever stayed. The next morning, the town woke up to something it was not expecting. A video less than a minute long had been posted overnight by a man walking home from a late shift. It showed a girl, young, small, terrified, being pushed to the ground by a group of men. Then came the dog, a blur of fur and fury leaping between her and danger, teeth bared, protecting without hesitation. The clip ended with the men running off into the dark and the girl clutching the dog like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The caption simply read, a little girl, a dog, in a city that should be ashamed. By noon, the video had over 80,000 views. By evening, it had gone viral. News anchors played it on local channels. Comments flooded in. Who is this child? Where are her parents? That dog is a hero. How did this happen in our town? Margaret saw the video while sipping tea in the back room of her small bookstore. She watched it 3 times, her heart breaking a little more each time she recognized the street corner, the old post office steps. It was just 2 blocks from her shop. Without hesitation, she pulled on her coat and went looking. It took her less than an hour to find them. Emma and Bear were huddled beneath a tarp near the old train depot, the same spot where the attack had happened. Bear lifted his head when he heard her footsteps, but did not growl. Emma sat still, wide-eyed, clutching his fur. I saw you, Margaret said gently on the video. I saw what they did to you and what he did to protect you. Emma said nothing. Margaret knelt slowly. Would it be all right if you came with me just for a little while? I have food and warm blankets. No one will hurt you, I promise. Emma looked at Bear. He blinked slowly, then rested his head on her lap. She nodded. That night, for the first time in over a year, Emma ate a hot meal, scrambled eggs and toast with real butter. She slept in a clean bed under layers of quilts. Bear snoring softly on the rug beside her. Margaret sat nearby until Emma's breathing slowed into a steady rhythm. Tears in her eyes. The next day, Bear was taken to a veterinarian. The wound on his leg was cleaned and stitched, and the doctor marveled at his calm demeanor. He is more than a stray, she said. He is something special. Emma was taken to the hospital for a checkup. She was underweight with old bruises and a dislocated shoulder, but nothing was broken that could not heal. News of the video prompted the mayor's office to respond. Within days, a public hearing was called at City Hall. Margaret brought Emma and Bear. The chamber was packed. When the footage played on the large screen, there was silence, then gasps, then tears. A woman in the front row covered her mouth and whispered, that poor girl. When the video ended, Margaret stood up and spoke for Emma. She told them about the night she found her, about the fear, the injuries, the loyalty of the dog, and the failure of a city to notice. I did not know how she slipped through the cracks, Margaret said, voice firm. but warm. But I know this is that dog. Had not been there, we would be having a very different conversation today. The crowd applauded, officials nodded. Solemnly, the police announced that the 3 men in the video had been identified and arrested, and before the session closed, the court granted Margaret emergency guardianship of Emma. Pending full adoption, Emma squeezed Bear's paw and leaned into Margaret's side. A city that once turned its back now stood in her corner, and justice long delayed had finally come. Life changed in quiet, beautiful ways. Emma started school just a few weeks after the court hearing. She was nervous, at first holding Bear's leash tightly as they stood at the edge of the playground. But the children were curious, not cruel. They asked questions, they offered smiles. One even gave Bear a piece of her sandwich. Margaret packed lunches with little notes tucked inside. She braided Emma's hair in the mornings and helped her with homework. At night, Bear would curl up beside Emma's chair, his tail thumping softly every time she giggled. He walked her to school every morning and waited patiently until she returned. He was not just a pet, he was a guardian, a grounding force. The school officially certified him as Emma's emotional support animal. He had his own badge and a vest that read Guardian Dog of Hope. As weeks turned to months, their story continued to ripple through the community. A local reporter pitched the story to a national media outlet, and soon a full-length documentary was produced. The Girl, the Dog, and the City that watched it aired in prime time, drawing millions of viewers. People cried. They donated. Letters came in from across the country, from kids, from veterans, from other homeless families. They thanked Emma for her courage. They called Bear a hero. They called both of them miracles. Emma did not think of herself that way. She still had bad dreams. Sometimes she still flinched when someone yelled too loud or when the streets felt too quiet. But she had Bear and Margaret and a home. She had hope, and now she had a voice. By the time Emma turned 16, she was already speaking at local youth shelters and advocacy events, standing tall behind podiums with Bear lying quietly at her feet. She spoke not just about survival, but about visibility. Kids like me don't disappear, she told a crowd once. We're pushed away until no one sees us, but we're still here. We still matter. At a school assembly one spring afternoon, Emma stood on stage in front of hundreds of students. She shared her story, not just the pain, but the power of one dog's loyalty and the kindness of one stranger who cared enough to stop. When she finished, the auditorium was silent. Then a single student stood, then another and another, until the entire room was on their feet, applauding. Bear, old now, but still strong, lifted his head from where he rested near the stage, his eyes calm as tail, giving a slow, steady wag. That night, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned golden behind their little home, Emma sat on the porch steps with Bear curled beside her. The air was warm, the breeze gentle. She rested her head against his thick fur and whispered, "You saved me, Bear." More than once he blinked slowly and pressed closer. There were no fireworks, no grand music, just 2 souls, side by side, healed by love. The world almost forgot to give, and in that silence the message was clear. The world turned its back on them, but together they stood and reminded us what love really means. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey of resilience, loyalty, and the bond between a little girl and the dog who never left her side. Emma and Bear's story is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest corners of the world, love can still be found, and sometimes it comes wrapped in fur with quiet eyes and a fearless heart. If this story touched your heart, there are so many more waiting to be discovered. Subscribe to Amazing Paws, stories for more real-life tales of courage, second chances, and the animals who change our lives in ways we never expect. Like, share, and let us know in the comments, how did Bear's bravery inspire you? Because here at Amazing Paw Stories, we believe that every paw print has a purpose, and every story can change a Life see you in the next one.